welcome back for another SPL Book Talks. This week we are going to be discussing a young adult novel called The Hate You Give, and it's written by Angie Thomas. I'm Myranda Davis. I'm the children's and young adult librarian. And with me today I have, go ahead guys.
I'm Colleen and I'm the manager at the library.
I'm Justine. I'm a library page.
So I was just going to state up front that I actually haven't read the book, but I watched the movie. So we thought it would be kind of cool to give a perspective from both sides of reading the book and watching the movie. So we can compare and contrast. But we talked a little before this, and there's the book, I think, or the movie follows the book pretty closely, I believe, and hits the same themes and the same makes the same points, I think, that the book does. So, and it's a very good movie. I would say it follows it closely, and it really gives you some interesting things to think about. So you want to give a synopsis? Myranda, you had a
Sure. So the story is about a character named Star Carter, I think is her last name.
Yeah.
She's a teenager. I think she's like 16 years old, and she's kind of caught between two worlds. She goes to a prep school where it's a predominantly white community, but she lives in the city in an area, I think it's called Garden Heights.
That's correct.
And she feels a little bit out of place in Garden Heights after attending the prep school. And she goes to a party in Garden Heights with a friend of hers. And she runs into an old childhood friend while she is there. And there's a gang shooting that's nearby, which makes the party, disseminate. And Khalil, who is her childhood friend, just offers to drive her home to make sure she gets there safely. But on the way there, he is pulled over by a police officer for, I don't think there was a very clear reason as to why he was pulled over.
I think in the movie, and I don't know if it's the same in the book, but it was something like, I think he said he made a turn or he pulled out without turning on his blinker, changed lanes without turning on his blinker or something.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in the book they just were like, his taillight was out or something.
Yeah,
something minor.
It seemed pretty minor for the approaching it, but anyway.
Yeah, but the officer makes Khalil get out of the vehicle. I believe he pats him down and searches him, tells him to stay where he is, and Khalil very innocently opens back up the door to check on Star because he wants to make sure that she is okay, and he gets shot, which is
the policeman thinks he's reaching for the gun, and he actually pulls out a hairbrush, at least in the movie, and the policeman thinks it's a gun, and he shoots him, and then Khalil dies. So she's a witness, and then it goes into there's a lot it goes into. You were talking about her name is Star, and the fact that she lives in two worlds kind of with her Garden Heights family and going to the prep school, Williamson, I think it was. And she, in the movie, she says she's Star version 2 when she's at the prep school, which I thought was kind of interesting. So she kind of had to play two parts. Like this is her at home, and this is the way she has to be at school, because Williamson is a prep school, and she's a Black woman in a mostly white school. So it's a whole different, and of course the income level is pretty different from her home and most of the kids who go to that school. She also has a boyfriend who is white, which I thought was interesting. But he seems very, I don't know about in the book, I don't know how in depth they go with him in the book, but he was very open to trying to understand her life, even when she was shutting him out sometimes because she just didn't know how to handle the pressures of both lives, I think.
Yeah, I think because she lived such a different lifestyle and had so many different experiences from her classmates, she didn't know how to explain or portray to them what life was really like in her
Right.
community because they had no clue.
Mhm.
Right. And they all have a perception of what her life is like,
Hmm.
She comes from the hood or whatever you want to call it. In their eyes, it's a life that they don't really get, even though it was interesting. They kind of try to culturally appropriate her life, and her lifestyle using all of the, slang words that many people of color, African American communities are using. She and that was I thought really pointed out that how that happens, and seeing that happen. I think we've seen that happen here even. Um, Justine probably has seen it more than us. She's in high school still, so
Yeah.
There are a lot of people like that.
yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's kind of too bad that they just appropriate it for their own trying to be cool, which is
Mhm.
interesting because I don't think they'd want that life really, but I think it's interesting that they think it's cool. I don't know.
Um, I think it might be important to touch on her childhood experience. I know
Yeah.
Justine said she has a flashback in the beginning of the book to when she
Mhm.
was a really young girl and her friend, what was her friend's name again?
Natasha.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Natasha. Yeah, they're playing in the street together,
Mhm.
and her friend is killed in the crossfire from a gang shooting. And it's just, it really affects her life. I think going forward, it's constantly in the back of her mind. She really misses her friend, and it's just something that her friends from the prep school, like they know about it, but I don't think they fully comprehend how much it affects her.
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah. I don't think they understand her life at all, and so it's hard for her to assimilate fully into that prep school life.
Mm-hmm.
What I thought was interesting in the movie was the family dynamic in her life. Her father had been in prison for, I think he was selling drugs or something. It was part of that culture that is unfortunately in their community. But he had gotten out, and I felt like he was kind of reformed. He had kind of like gotten away from that lifestyle. He didn't bow down or try not to bow down to the local drug lord.
Mhm.
King is his name. He was the King Lords. So I thought he had a really interesting way of dealing with his kids, which in some cases you might think, at least from what I was watching, he seemed very tough and very, not mean, but very hard on them. But he did it, I think, out of love and because he felt like they needed to be tough to survive in that environment. And I think in the end, it's what saved them. It's what saved her. It's what saved all of them.
Mm-hmm.
It was just interesting. I really I enjoyed the fact that they were such a loving family, at least in the movie. They portrayed them as very loving. I mean, tough love, but loving, and always, looking out for them and their good. And they wanted them. He always talked about, he named her Star because he wanted her to shine. He knew she would shine, and so he had this belief in her and this, you know, I don't know. It just was an empowerment, I think, for her, and it was just beautiful. I just loved that part of it. I just thought that was amazing because he was part of that lifestyle and what was happening in that community. It helped point out why these young men mostly are being drawn into this lifestyle and why they get in that. It's not generally a choice from what we were seeing. It's a they've got to do something to earn money, and there is no other choice. There are no other jobs. They're in a situation like her friend Khalil was in that situation. I mean, you see, his mom was a drug addict, right?
Yeah.
His
And
grandmother had cancer.
grandmother had cancer, and
Yeah, and I believe she owed King money, if I remember right.
probably. And so, I mean, he was what at the time, probably when he started dealing or whatever, he's probably like 15 or less. You know, what are your choices when you're 15 and you don't have no family support, nobody to help you, nobody bringing in money. So he had to be the income for that family. And that just, I don't know. So I think that points out why it's a vicious cycle there.
Yeah, I think he also did it in order to protect his mother from King because he was worried that King was going to hurt her, basically.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine how difficult that would be to take on that burden as a young teenager.
I can't either. I just can't imagine that. So it kind of gives you a little peek into the reasons behind, you know, gangs and the reasons that kids get involved in them. Usually it's for their own protection or their family's protection or to earn some money to make it help. It's all tied together, you know, to help the family survive. It's just a survival. It's not about getting ahead in the world.
Yeah, there's always like that stereotype with gangs and drugs and stuff, especially with like African Americans. Oh, you know, they all must be in a gang and they all must sell drugs and they're all just like doing these horrible things for no reason.
Right.
I think that storyline really like highlights like, oh, you know, they're not all just doing it to be bad or whatever. They're just trying to get by like everyone else.
Right.
The way they can in their situation.
Yeah, that's exactly right, I think. And there was a line in the movie, and I don't remember, I won't be able to quote it or anything, and I can't even remember if it was her father that said it or one of her friends, but something about the fact that, you know, they're making a lot of money, but do you see anybody really making it? Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, they have the nice, the fancy sneakers and maybe the bling on their, you know, or the nice car or whatever, but it's all an illusion in the end because most of that is like money that's owed or, you know, it's going to come out of their bodies, you know, that's going to owe their life to whatever. Yeah, so nobody's getting rich off of this. Nobody's making it out of the hood or the, you know, the ghetto here, you know, just because they're making money. It's everything they own is owed to the king and king lords in this case.
I just would like to touch back. I know you were talking about Star's father earlier. One of the other things that I really liked about him was that he stayed in his community and really tried to have some sort of impact to make it better after coming out of jail. Like, he didn't run, he could have, but he chose to stay and try to make a difference. I think that's really big.
I did too. I thought that was great because he owned that community grocery store there. And, you know, so it's a small little community. People come to it. And I know his wife kept saying, you know, the mom was always like, we got to move out of here. Let's move. We move. I mean, this is terrible. And I understand her feelings. She wanted to get her kids away from this violence and this horrible cycle that, you know,
absolutely.
Yeah, everybody's falling into. So, but in the end, that's at least in the movie they talked about, and we stayed and we made things better, and, you know, and the community came together and against the gangs and said, you know, we're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to be silent. You know, you're not going to pay us off for our silence anymore. We're going to We're going to speak up when we see things happen, which is progress, and that was a good thing. So it gave you hope, that the cycle can be broken, but it takes some really strong people to do that, because that kind of cycle is hard to get out of.
So it might be a little bit different from the book. So at the end in the book, they actually buy a new home near where their uncle lives, I believe, in a nicer part of the city. But they keep the store in Garden Heights, and they continue to run that, and that's their way of trying to give back to the community.
That makes
so must
sense.
be it's different in the movie.
Yeah, it is. They stay in their house and they improve it, and they, like I said, they build the community because everybody's supporting each other now, and not bowing to the drug lords. So, but either way, it's a good solution. They're breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
They're making things still happen for people, and that's important. Now, we said this was written in 2017, or at least that's when the book came out. And I just felt like it just struck me as being so relevant to what's happening today. As we all know, there's a lot of racial tension now, more so than there has been in quite a while. I mean, it's always been there, and that's the thing that I think is interesting and sad in a lot of ways, is that we keep fighting it, and it just stays, and we can't seem to get past it. But it was just, the movie was so relevant because they were, here's the young black man who was killed by the police, and then there's, protests and riots because the police officer is not held accountable. I mean, that's every news story in the past year or more has been that way, but it just goes to show you that this is just going and going. It's ongoing, and it's sad. At least in the movie, you guys will have to help me. At the end, she goes to the protest that is for Khalil, and she finally decides to use her voice because she had struggled with it, which is probably something we should talk about too. But she had struggled with how to talk about it for a lot of reasons. But when she finally does, she's up there, she's got her microphone. I don't know if this is what happens, or the bullhorn thing. She's saying Khalil was a person, but she kept yelling it, he was a person, he was alive, he was a living person, and it looked like it might help in the beginning, but then the protests became more violent and the police pushed harder on the protesters, and then things got out of hand. They started, the tear gas and everything started happening. And the quote that she said, which is probably in the book, she said, "No matter what we say, no matter how loud we shout, they refuse to hear us." And I mean, really hear us. I'm not talking about, yeah, I hear you, I hear the sound. Then they really take it in and understand it. And I think that's really what's happened. That's what's happened. That explains exactly what's happening now and what has been happening for years, obviously.
Right. And I think that also relates to right after Khalil dies, Star goes to the police station about what happened, because she's like the only witness, and she's telling them the story of what happened, but they keep asking her questions about Khalil, like, was he a troublemaker? Like, was he dealing drugs and stuff? And they're just focusing on that instead of the fact of the situation.
Right.
Still somehow Khalil's fault because of his, like, the fact that he dealt drugs, which isn't even related to how he died, because they patted him down.
Right.
So that was just, I read that part and it made me so upset that instead of just listening to the story fully and letting her tell it, because it took her a lot of courage to tell them, because she didn't even want to at first.
Right.
She makes this decision and she goes there and she's trying to tell them what actually happened, and it's not like she's gonna lie or something. And they still just don't listen. to her, and they try to like twist it like, oh, he was a troublemaker.
Right.
What should we have done besides shoot him, you know? And it's just
Yeah.
ridiculous that they couldn't have just let her tell it and then proceed from there.
Right. And that, yeah, that led to her, or that continued her feeling of not wanting to talk about it. That was one of the reasons, because they're not really listening to her anyway. And then there was the fear of retaliation from the King Lords, because she would be tattling basically if she talked about a lot of it, because his lifestyle was all tied up with the King Lords.
Yeah.
And he was beholden to them, obviously. I mean, he had nice sneakers, he had a nice car. She was, she's like, what are you really doing? I know their conversation in the car was like, what are you really doing with your life? Where are you really? It kind of, he didn't necessarily, I don't think in the movie he necessarily came right out and said that, but you knew that's what was happening, that he was under a lot of pressure. And, but I like they really set up, at least in the movie, they really set up their relationship too, in that short car conversation and stuff, about their childhood and how they used to play Harry Potter. And I'm assuming that was in the book too.
I don't remember. Not
They all
sure.
had wands, and they played Harry Potter. This is what was in the movie. Maybe it's not in the book. I don't remember. Well, I don't know because I didn't read it. But it just gave us a really good sense of the innocence of childhood, and the fact that these are just three little kids who just were playing and having fun when they were little, and enjoying Harry Potter, which most little kids do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but for me, that humanizes Khalil. I'm not thinking of him as just this drug dealer, smooth talking guy that maybe he appears to be, but he's not. He's just a young kid trying to make it in the world and doesn't have a support system to help him. I just think that was important, to humanize him that way. And I think that unfortunately, when she goes to the police, they're not looking at him as that little boy, that young man who, really is just a person who's trying to struggle and get through life. They're looking at him as a Black man who's selling drugs.
Yep.
And so he probably was causing some kind of mischief,
I think she experiences that at the school too when she returns, because she doesn't even tell her friends or her boyfriend for quite a while in the book what happened. She carries that inside, and she's hearing all of this feedback from them about, well, he was a drug dealer, kind of like at the police station. So all around, she's getting all this feedback when really she's just mourning the loss of her innocent friend.
Yeah, she doesn't. Yeah, because she doesn't tell them that she's the one who was there. They keep hearing on the news and that this happened, but they don't know who the witness was or who the girl was. And she doesn't want to tell for lots of reasons. That it's that this systemic racism that's in our blood here that we can't seem to get past. Seeing people for who they really are, instead of just looking at them as a certain, because they're a certain color or in a certain part of society, that they must be these people. And it's not that way. And we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. You prejudge people, and we shouldn't do that. And that just pointed that out. That was a really good way of pointing it out.
On this topic, I like how the book and the movie, because I watched the scene in the movie where Star and her friend Haley have that confrontation thing. And I like how in the book, I like how they dealt with that, because it is a real problem, especially with white people. Are very quick to stereotype and judge and just not even want to look at some of the other things that people of color go through. Because I remember in the book it was talking about how Star had a Tumblr page, and she would share pictures of like hardships that people of color went through. And I remember they talked about her sharing pictures of what happened to Emmett Till a really long time ago. And Haley unfollowed her Tumblr, and she didn't think much of it, but then towards the end of the book, she confronts her, and Haley was saying that it was because she didn't want to like see all that trash on her Tumblr feed.
Yeah.
And Star definitely confronted her, I think more than once in the book, and I like how they talked about that because I know a lot of people who think the way that Haley thinks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was nice to read about how Star was kind of like putting her in her place, but respectfully at first. Like, you need to realize that these things happen and you shouldn't hide from them because you should educate yourself. And I don't know, I just thought it was nice how the book kind of like brought that up because lots of people need to know that.
Yeah, I think it did well, at least in the movie, it did a good job of pointing it out. It's like you just look at, suddenly it was kind of putting a mirror up to ourselves and saying, see, this is what you're doing. This is because you say it this way or you do it this way. That's not acceptable.
Even if you don't intend it.
Yeah.
Like
It's easy to not intend it. I mean, to say things that, you know, you don't intend to say it that way. But we need to be more mindful and think of those things. But that really did put a mirror up to Haley's face and say, this is what you're doing. You are being racist when you do these things. And
yeah, that scene in the movie was so powerful. The one where she took the hairbrush.
Yeah. She made her understand the fear. I found many moments in the movie tearing up many times because it was so powerful and moving. There were so many pieces of it that were, well, the strength of the characters in the movie. I mean, Star is so strong, really. She doesn't realize it at first, but I think in the end, she's realizing her strength and her power. And it just was so moving to see her come into that and realize that, you know, and in the end that it was really, you know, love is really what you have to give. You know, you can't give hate, you've got to give love. I don't know.
Do you want to talk about her half brother Seven at all?
Sure.
I feel like he's kind of has an important character because his mother is, I can't remember if she's married to King or if she's dating King.
It wasn't clear.
I'm not really sure what their relationship is, but they're a couple.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of pulled in between, and it's how he handles it is, for someone his age, it's very mature.
I thought so too. Yeah. Because his mother was kind of crazy.
Yes.
I mean, you know, I don't know if she had an addiction problem or I don't remember. It wasn't clear in the movie. Maybe you guys got more of that in the book, but I thought it was interesting also the way the dynamics between the two families worked, that, you know, because Seven's mother and Star's father had an affair at some point, and that's where Seven came from. But Star's mother, her real mother, she really accepted the situation and she forgave her husband and moved past it. There was a whole scene with that in the movie with her Star and her mom. And she's like, Star's like, how can you, forgive him for that? And she said, did you forgive him for that? And she basically said, yeah, I did. I had to move on because what was more important was our family and being together as a family and my love for him. I mean, they're in the movie, it's very evident that they are still very much in love and crazy about each other, which is kind of cool.
I felt like Star's mom even like claimed Seven as her own,
Yeah.
which I thought was very moving. She
Yeah.
really took him in, like she called him her son. She's like, this is your home.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and she was there was a scene in the movie, I don't know if it's in the book. It's Khalil's funeral, and the star and her family are sitting near the front in the one of the pews, and King and Seven's mom come in, and Seven is sitting with Star and their family. So King and his mom come in the back, and his mom is making a big scene yelling to Seven, come back here, or something. And you know, Star's mom is just like, you need to go back and be with your mom. You know, like she knew that it was just to keep the peace. This was the right thing to do. Your mom needs you right now, basically. It was really interesting, that dynamic between the families. But yeah, I think Seven was really in a real strange place. I mean, he, like you said, he's caught between both, but he was so mature and handled things so well. I was real impressed with that. He was he was still a good kid. He was still really, I don't know, caring and smart, and he hadn't gotten sucked into the whole King Lord thing. He saw his stepfather, I guess, as who he was. I mean, he knew who King was. King was a problem.
This reminded me of the relationship with their Uncle Carlos.
Oh yeah.
When Maverick was in prison, Uncle Carlos was like Star's father figure, and he still is after Maverick gets out of prison. And there is a scene in the book where Maverick kind of confronts Uncle Carlos and is like, you're not her father. And then Uncle Carlos kind of throws the fact that he was in prison back in his face. Like, I'm not her biological father, but you weren't there for her for however many years. And that was crazy to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked the uncle. He was, because he was a police officer, at least in the movie. He's a police
Yeah.
officer, right?
Yep.
And they don't live in Garden Heights. They live in a little, like I think we'd mentioned it earlier, they live in a little nicer area of the city, wherever it is.
Yep.
And in fact, they go there when King attacks their house. He throws some, I don't know, rocks or shoots through the window or something, threaten Star basically because of her tattling on them. There's a scene there where Star talks to her uncle about, you know, the way police pull you over, and he gave the, you know, from the police's point of view, this is what we're looking for, this is what we're seeing, you know, and he kind of, it was a really interesting scene because, you know, from the police point of view, of course, they're worried for their safety when you have a situation like that, because they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know who they're pulling over. They don't know what this kid's background is or whatever. And so he was pointing all that out to her, and I think she questioned him something like, so would you have shot me or shot Khalil or something like that if it had been you in that situation? And he had a hard time answering that question. Because, you know, I think in his training, he's going through what he, you know, has been trained to do and what they need to think about. Which I think is valid, certainly. But he finally said, the world is it's a very complex world, Star. And she just couldn't accept that, you know, because from her point of view, she'd been there and seen what happened. And, you know, and so it did help you see a little of both sides of that, a little, you know, where the police are in a situation that's scary for them too. I think it was important to point that out. So this is not just a one-sided, you know, cops are bad kind of situation. It pointed out how complex and so many gray areas in that relationship between cops and who they pull over, you know. That was a really good moment, I thought. I don't know if that's in the book or not, but it was a good conversation.
I remember her talking with him about, you know, what happened and how it was handled, but I don't remember him discussing things from the cop's point of view in the book. Do you, Justine?
Not off the top of my head, but if it was there, I would not be surprised.
Yeah. And they may have just used it as a device in the movie, and they probably used it to help point things out and not to be, look, we're not just saying that all cops are bad. This is
right. Which is important. Like,
absolutely, because it is a complex situation. It's not black and white. It's literally, it's not black and white. It's very gray. There's so many gray areas in that situation. No, I just think it was a really relevant, it's a really relevant movie, book, topic. I think people should read it or watch the movie. Either way, I think is a good choice, because it's a good depiction of reality and what's happening, I think. And I think you get to see it from a perspective that you might not know about or think about. So that's my final thoughts on it, I guess.
it just really brings it to light. Like, this is something that we should be talking about, and the book does it really well.
Yeah, I think it's a very timely topic, obviously, and coming from a small community, we don't really see or experience it in the way that others do, being right in the midst of it. And I think it's an eye-opener.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is important, that because we don't live in that, we live in rural America. We're pretty, not very diverse in our, racial.
Demographic, maybe?
Yeah,
Sorry.
demographic. Yeah, we're pretty one-sided when it comes to that. So I think that's all the more important reason for us to read and be aware of these kinds of things, because it's happening in the world, and it will get here eventually, like all things do to small towns and rural America. They get there. So we need to be thinking about that and be ready for that. So I think that we'll wrap it up, right, girls? Is this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So thanks for coming to our book talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got some, revelations. I don't know. And we encourage you to go check it out. We do have the book at the library you can take out, and I'm sure the movie is available. I don't think that we have it at our library, although I think I may have to change that. And but I'm sure it's available through the 4-county system. So come check us out. Thanks, everybody. See you later.